Hey guys, this is Matt. Welcome back to my garage. Today my goals are real simple. Don't get soaked in fuel and don't burn my garage to the ground. All right, hopefully you guys can hear me okay because it's a little cramped under the car. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get this fuel filter popped out and then see about relocating it to the back of the subframe. I'm going to use the new OE fuel filter that I have purchased, but what I want to do is get this OE bracket off of the body, and then it looks like it's in okay condition, but I want to go ahead and verify that there's no serious corrosion or issues. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is loosen the two bolts that basically hold this this bracket on that clamps the fuel filter in place. So I'm not going to disconnect any of the fuel lines because I don't want to have to deal with the fuel for right now. So hopefully I can get the bracket removed, get the fuel filter out, get the bracket off the car, clean it up, relocate it, install the new fuel filter, and then before I disconnect all these lines, depressurize the system, and then go ahead and pre-measure all the lines that I'm going to need, connect them up to the new fuel filter, and then hopefully when I disconnect the fuel lines from the hard lines, I can just immediately plug the new lines in their place, so I don't have a big mess or lose a lot of fuel. So I'm going to go ahead and get these bolts off here. It's very dirty under here. So this bracket should just kind of lift away. All right, so the fuel filter is now free, and I'll worry about getting this bracket off in a second. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and get this bracket off because this is the one I need to relocate to the subframe. There's still one more bolt I've got to get this this little bracket off, but I need to get these two bolts out to free this bracket, and that's two 10 mil bolts. And I think because it's pretty tight space, I'm just going to use a ratcheting wrench to try to get these off. So I've got everything out that I need to get out for now. I'm just gonna let the filter hang here. And so basically it ended up being 5 10 mil bolts that you had to look at, 2 in the body, 2 that held the bracket onto the filter, and then the final bolt was concealed when you get that off the filter. So I'm gonna get all these parts over to my bench and see how dirty they are. May need to spray them with some spray paint. And then I'm gonna come back and locate the bracket on the back of the subframe. This is the back of the subframe, so the differential would normally be sitting right in here. The key thing would be to make sure you find a nice flat spot and that it's tucked out of the way from any chance of it getting hit, either by debris or anything that could move with the car. So a good spot for it is right here on the left-hand side of the rear subframe. So when the bracket is on the car, it's basically oriented like this. Basically it bolts straight up into the body just like this. So for my, that orientation wouldn't quite work out. So what I'm gonna do is rotate this bracket 90 degrees, and essentially that'll allow me now to mount it up here. I'll have to drill and tap some holes, but basically that'll be, I could adjust that as high as I want to. I could really tuck it up to where there's really no chance for anything hitting it, and really the higher the better. Obviously keeping in mind that you still need to be able to access the two 10 mil nuts, bolts that are going to be up here to remove the filter. So I'm probably going to line up my holes roughly around this hole that's already in the subframe. I think that'll give me up high enough to not worry about anything impacting the filter, but also give me enough clearance to remove the filter once it's in place and to drill the hole. So I'm basically going to mount it somewhere like that. I have my 2 holes marked out, and what I'll probably do is drill the first one. The second hole in the bracket is elongated, so this hole over here is elongated, so it probably gives you some room for adjustment, but I'll probably drill this one out first, bolt it in, make sure it's nice and square before I make a final mark for the second bolt. So now I'm going to go scrub these parts and maybe spray them with some paint. They're not really, I mean, I think the rust that's on there is just surface rust, but might as well clean them while we have them apart, and then while these are drying, I'll come and drill and tap these holes. Just because of my clearance, I basically have a right angle adapter on my drill so that I can reach this a little bit better. I'll use new M6 hardware, and I've got an M6 tap, and that would require a 5mm drill bit. The closest thing I have is a 3/16, and so I'm just going to start with this 1/8 inch drill bit to get a pilot hole, and then once I've got that hole, I'll drill it with a 3/16, and then we can tap it. So my M6 tap was pretty well, I've used it a ton, so it's quite dull. So I'm just going to switch to a 1/4-20. I've got 1/4-20 fasteners on hand, which this is almost a brand new tap, and I know I'll be able to get it done. So I'll go ahead and use this tap, and it's not that different from an M6, at least in size, but I know I'll be able to get the hole threaded with this one. All right, so there it is. It's mounted on the subframe, and I had these handy, so I just use these, and I'll get some better hardware when I go to finish the installation. But so for now, I really am going to go ahead and take these and get them sanded down and spray them with some paint. When I come back, I'll look at getting the fuel filter, the new one, installed so that we can start running the lines. So I have my brackets painted and installed on the car. I went ahead and installed the fuel filter so I can start routing the lines. One thing I did not take into consideration with the OEM filter is that there are basically alignment grooves. There's basically a groove every 120 degrees, so you can only really rotate this in so many positions. And so this upper connection to the fuel filter is probably further back than I had anticipated. There's still, maybe an inch of space between it and the gas tank shield, but if I rotated it, it would be into the bracket. So this will have to be the orientation that I do it in. So what I'm going to do next is get my 5/16 inch high pressure fuel line and make the connections to the fuel filter, and then snake the fuel line up behind the subframe and try to get it approximately in the same location as the factory connection points. And then I'll measure the exact length of hose that I need, mark it, and cut it. So I will get these hoses on and get them snaked up, and then I'll show you where they need to connect to up underneath the car. I know it's a little cramped underneath the car, so I just moved the camera for a second so that you guys could see how that's all mounted up. I went ahead and got all new hardware for everything. The bracket wasn't, there was a little corrosion on the bracket, but it'll be okay for now. Eventually, long term, I'll probably get a different fuel filter set up, but this will work in the meantime. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those fuel lines cut. All right, so I've got my lines hooked up, and putting a little bit of WD-40 on the hose, or the filter itself will help slide those on way easier than just trying to push them on. So I've routed them up underneath the over top the subframe, and then they're coming out from there and I've just got to kind of loosely set around. So I've already marked on the length that I'm going to need on each hose. I'm trying to keep the hoses out of the way of anything where they could rub, which they are resting against the subframe. So I'll probably get another piece of hose or some sort of shielding or something I've got around the garage to protect that where it could rub. So I'm going to get these cut to length, and then I basically need to start disconnecting where the OE fuel lines hook up. So you basically have got the two connections right here, and protocol for this would definitely be depressurize the fuel system by turning the car on, pulling the fuse for the fuel pump, letting the engine die, and pulling the gas cap, and that should relieve the pressure off the system. Now, my situation is that I have not had this car on for a while, and I have the muffler off, I have the drive shaft off, and for me, I think I'm gonna take the risk and just try to loosen the lines and catch any fuel that comes out with some rags or a container. It's probably not the ideal situation, but for me, I don't have to worry about disturbing the neighbors. The risk of having some fuel leak out is gonna be okay. So I'll have to loosen these two clamps and start trying to wiggle these hoses off, which I've heard can be very difficult. And I really hate just doing these little short clips where I tell you what I'm gonna do, I turn the camera off, I do it, and then show you the result. But working underneath the car is extremely tight quarters. Hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, this should be the last project that I have to do for a while underneath the car, at least off of the ground. I have ordered a car lift that will be hopefully coming in the next couple weeks. That's going to be huge for the garage so that I can actually get these jobs done more efficiently and be able to film what I'm doing a little easier as well. So let me get these lines cut up, and then I'll set the camera up when I go to take off these fuel lines. I apologize if you hear all the crinkling, but I put some plastic down in case it does spray gas everywhere. So I've moved the original hose clamps back. Man, it's the second time I almost took my face out. I've taken my hose clamps off of, right there is where the flare is on the hard line. So we got those moved past. I was gonna try to use these hose pliers, but the angle is gonna be tough, especially for this top one. The bottom one will be okay, but this top one's gonna be hard. Just because there's not a really good angle for that. So fortunately, I'm gonna have to see if I can pull that off by hand. So far these are being a bitch. They're pretty stuck on there from years of probably never being taken off. These are probably OEM. It's just really hard to get a good angle on them. So I'm hoping I can just break them free. So what I've done is cut a slit in the fuel hose because it was just too stuck and I was putting too much pressure on the hard line. So I believe now it is ready to come off. So I'll use my pliers here to hopefully just work this off. All right, so not very much gas came out, maybe a couple tablespoons. So considering how well that worked, I'll probably just do the same thing up here. So I've got a little WD-40 on my finger. I'm just going to use that to lube up the hard line. All right, so I have the fuel lines connected with new hose clamps. Got them underneath this, over top the subframe, and then I'll pan out in a second so that you can see the rest of it. So everything's nice and secure. I went ahead and used some plastic tubing to protect where they will be rubbing against the top of the subframe a little bit. Otherwise, everything else is fairly loose. Nothing seems to be pulled too tight or in a pinch. So here's the fuel filter and the lines coming out of it. And like I said, they just basically run up between the fuel tank and the subframe. I want to run this a little bit and then, you know, come in and do a check and make sure I don't have any gas leaks. But for now, the next thing I need to do is get the rear diff put back in. And that's going to involve putting the new clips on the axles and then getting it set in place and then bolting everything back up. So what I was thinking about, I wanted to show you guys a quick angle of the fuel filter now that the diff is back in place. So it's hard to get a good angle because the suspension's in the way, but you know, it basically, the bottom of this filter is roughly the same as the bottom of the diff. Of course, you don't really have anything right here that could protect this if there was debris or something, but it wouldn't be that hard to make a little shield to protect this. But I think it'll be okay for now. Like I said, if in the future when I do a different filter system, I'll probably bring it up a little bit higher just to be safe. But it's all in. You know, I haven't obviously tested the pressurize the system yet, but I'll do that next once I get the wheels back on. But anyway, that's the fuel filter relocated with the diff.